passion story is memorable and compels attention is because it's the ultimate exemplar of a certain kind of story.
Today I want to look at a video by Jordan Peterson. Now this video is very interesting because Jordan Peterson is basically using the passion narrative in the Gospels as an archetype, an archetypal story of how we as humans must deal with the unjust suffering that we confront in our lives. Now, it's a very interesting take on that story, and let's watch this video, and then afterwards I will have a few insights.
Part of the reason that the passion story is memorable and compels attention is because it's the ultimate exemplar of a certain kind of story. The question is, well, what's the story? And the story is the story of unjust tragedy, right? And it's the ultimate exemplar of unjust suffering and unjust tragedy because the formal structure of the story is that the worst thing imaginable happens to the best possible person. Torture and death at the hand of the mob and the tyrant. Okay, so that's bad. And also emerging as a consequence of betrayal, and not just betrayal, but betrayal of the closest person, right, the best friend. And then that's all pretty bad. Torture, mob, tyrant, betrayal. That's a lot of bad things. But then it's made worse by the fact that the person who's being judged by the crowd and treated worse than a criminal, in fact despised in comparison to those known to be criminal, was also a person who only did what was best all the time. Christ is put to death by the Romans in some real sense, but also by his own people. And so he suffers at the hands of a tyrant, and the tyrant who's the agent of his death is also a moral relativist who asks what truth means, and the crowd is offered the opportunity to allow Christ to escape from death, and they choose a criminal instead. And so what's happened is that all the terrible things that could happen to you in life are stacked up in this story. And so that's extremely interesting. And so it's a very, very dark story. And so then what you think, well, what do people do? What are people doing when they hear that story? Or even more to the point, what are they doing when they go on a pilgrimage, which you could do if you just went to a church, especially a Catholic church, because the Catholics do this particularly, and you walk the Stations of the Cross or you contemplate the Stations of the Cross. What are you doing exactly? Well, you might ask yourself, what are you doing when you go see a horror movie? And that's a really good question, because it's so preposterous that you would go see a horror movie. It's like you'll do that voluntarily, you'll line up to do it, and you'll pay for it. Why? So you can be disgusted and terrified. It's like, what the hell's wrong with you? Well, seriously, like, what are you up to? And the answer is, you're facing what's disgusting and terrifying. How do I improve my life? And one answer would be, well, are there things that you know you need to do that you're avoiding? And the answer to that's almost invariably yes. And then the pathway to your redemption would be, well, you have to start doing those things. And you might say, well, I can't because I'm too afraid. And then a behavioral psychologist would say, well, then just break the thing that you're afraid of down into smaller pieces and until you can find a piece that's small enough so you'll do it, and then start doing that. And you might think, well, that's a pretty little thing that I have to do to move forward. And the proper response to that is, it doesn't really matter if it's a little thing. What matters is that you confront something that you're afraid of voluntarily. That's what matters. And so then you might say, well, what are people doing when they go to Jerusalem to walk the Via Dolorosa? And what they're doing is they're trying to imagine how to confront the catastrophic suffering of life voluntarily. And they're participating in this story the same way you might participate in a movie. And you might think, that's actually pretty smart. And then you might think, well, what does that story of unjust suffering have to do with me? I don't mean me personally, I mean each of us. And the answer is, well, you don't think you're going to face unjust suffering in your life?
Okay, so there are just a few things that I want to highlight with what Jordan Peterson said. Firstly, I just want to state open and honestly that I love that people are having these discussions around Jesus. It's very easy in kind of philosophical debates to only talk about propositions. And what's interesting about Jordan Peterson is that he is very, very keen on human experience, and particularly how the story of Jesus applies to experience. And I think that is something that we should applaud, and frankly, we as Christians need to do a better job of. Secondly, though, and this is kind of a critique of Jordan Peterson, you can see that his presupposition is that Jesus is not God. He allegorizes Jesus to make Jesus kind of, an archetype for what he wants. He basically tries to apply the humanity of Jesus to his own experience, and he sees Jesus as a human, and he allegorizes him in a way that isn't helpful, or it isn't orthodoxical. He sees in the passion narrative of Christ how a human deals with unjust suffering, but he does not see the God who suffered unjustly for him. And that's fundamentally the gospel problem there. An apologetic that we could apply to a situation like Jordan Peterson is talking about here is the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. In time, space, and history, the God-man, the incarnate Word, Jesus Christ himself, became human flesh. So we can't just allegorize the story. We can't just allegorize the passion narrative. This is history. And that's something that Jordan Peterson also doesn't mention. That's all I have for this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video. Peace.